Long before forests covered the earth, before fish moved through the oceans, before birds crossed the sky or mammals walked across the land, the world was silent. There were no voices, no waves breaking against living shores, no insects hidden beneath leaves, no breathing creatures beneath the ancient sky. The earth existed for millions of years without a single living thing upon its surface. More than 4 billion years ago, the young planet was violent and unstable. The earth had only recently formed from clouds of dust and shattered rock orbiting a young sun. Across the early solar system, enormous collisions were still common. Fragments of stone and metal crossed through space at incredible speeds, crashing endlessly into the surfaces of newborn worlds. The Earth glowed beneath those impacts. Its surface was not calm land or peaceful ocean, but a sea of molten rock stretching toward every horizon. Rivers of lava moved beneath thick clouds of ash and steam. Volcanoes erupted constantly across the unstable crust, releasing enormous amounts of gas into the atmosphere. The sky itself looked nothing like the blue sky above the modern world. There was no oxygen to breathe. No ozone protected the surface from harsh radiation pouring down from the sun. And still, the planet continued to change. Slowly, over immense periods of time, the surface of the Earth began to cool. The endless bombardment from space became less violent. The outer layers of molten rock hardened into primitive crust. Steam rising from volcanic eruptions filled the skies above the cooling world. Thick clouds gathered over the planet for millions of years, darkening the atmosphere in a permanent storm. Then the rain began. At first, the rain fell onto burning stone and instantly vanished back into steam. But as the surface cooled further, the water remained. Rain continued falling across the earth not for days or centuries, but for unimaginable spans of time. Ancient storms circled the planet continuously. Water collected across the cooling crust. Slowly, the first oceans began to form. Those oceans were unlike anything alive today would recognize. They were warm, dark, and filled with dissolved minerals from the young planet beneath them. Volcanoes deep below the water released chemicals into the sea. Lightning storms flashed constantly above the waves. Meteors still struck the oceans from time to time, sending enormous walls of water across the empty world. And yet, despite all this movement, despite the storms and volcanic fire, the Earth remained lifeless. No cell drifted through those ancient waters. No algae floated beneath the surface. No bacteria rested upon the rocks. The oceans moved in complete silence beneath a sky untouched by life. If someone could have stood beside those early seas, they would not have recognized the planet as Earth at all. The continents were barren and black. The shoreline was empty stone. The air itself was poisonous. Above, the clouds moved endlessly across a dim horizon lit by volcanic fire and distant lightning. The world was still waiting. For millions upon millions of years, the oceans continued to cool beneath the dark skies. Tides moved across empty shores. Rain fell into waters that contained no living thing. Deep beneath the surface, volcanic vents opened along the ocean floor, releasing heat and minerals into the darkness below. In those hidden places beneath the ancient oceans, the chemistry of the Earth slowly became more complex. Simple molecules collided endlessly inside the warm water. Carbon moved through the seas beside hydrogen, sulfur, nitrogen, and iron. Energy from lightning and volcanic heat continuously reshaped the chemistry of the young planet. Molecules broke apart and formed again. Tiny structures appeared for brief moments before disappearing back into the waters. The Earth itself seemed to be experimenting. There was no plan guiding these ancient oceans. No living system directed the chemistry unfolding beneath the waves. And yet the conditions of the young world allowed matter to interact in ways that had never happened before in the history of the universe. Across the silent planet, countless chemical reactions unfolded every second. Most vanished immediately, some lasted longer. Over immense stretches of time, the oceans became vast laboratories where chemistry slowly drifted toward greater complexity. The process was unbelievably slow. Millions of years passed in darkness. The sun rose and disappeared over empty seas. Storms crossed the horizon again and again. Volcanoes erupted beneath skies untouched by oxygen. Entire coastlines formed and vanished while the planet continued its long transformation. And still, nothing lived. But hidden within those ancient waters, something remarkable was slowly becoming possible. The same elements that now exist inside every living creature on Earth already drifted through the oceans of the young world. The carbon inside forests, the hydrogen inside human blood, the oxygen that would one day fill the atmosphere, all of it already existed here long before the first cell appeared. The ingredients of life were present long before life itself. Slowly, the chemistry of the oceans continued to change. Molecules combined into more complicated forms. Some gathered into delicate chains. Others surrounded themselves with thin protective membranes. Warm currents carried these structures through the darkness beneath the waves. Most disappeared quickly. But the oceans had time. Hundreds of millions of years passed while the Earth remained silent beneath its ancient skies. Yet within that silence, the boundary between chemistry and biology slowly began to grow thinner. The warm oceans continued to move beneath the darkness. Lightning flashed above the distant horizon. Volcanic heat rose from beneath the seafloor. Minerals drifted endlessly through the water. And deep within those ancient oceans, matter itself was beginning to organize in a new way. The first step toward life had already begun. For hundreds of millions of years, the oceans of the young Earth continued to move beneath dark and lifeless skies. Warm rain still fell across the planet. Volcanoes continued to rise from the unstable crust. Deep beneath the water, cracks along the ocean floor released enormous heat from inside the Earth itself. Entire regions of the ancient seas glowed faintly with volcanic energy, hidden beneath the darkness. The world remained empty of life. And yet the oceans were no longer simple. The waters of the early Earth carried enormous quantities of dissolved minerals and chemicals released from volcanic rock below. Iron drifted through the seas beside sulfur, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. Warm currents moved these materials endlessly through the ancient oceans, carrying them across shallow coastlines and deep underwater valleys. Lightning flashed constantly above the surface. The atmosphere of the young Earth was thick with volcanic gases and storm clouds. Powerful electrical storms crossed the skies almost without pause. Again and again, lightning struck the oceans below, releasing bursts of energy into the ancient waters. Each flash briefly illuminated a world still waiting for life to appear. Far beneath those storms, chemistry continued unfolding slowly inside the darkness. Simple molecules drifted through the warm seas, colliding endlessly over immense periods of time. Most interactions disappeared immediately. Molecules formed and broke apart again. Tiny chemical structures emerged briefly before dissolving back into the water. But the oceans had patience. Millions of years passed while the chemistry of the Earth continued repeating itself over and over again. Across the planet, the same reactions unfolded countless times inside volcanic pools, shallow coastlines, and deep ocean vents hidden beneath the waves. The young Earth had become a vast chemical world. Some scientists believe these ancient oceans resembled enormous laboratories where the ingredients of life slowly gathered together. Heat from volcanoes, energy from lightning, minerals from rocks, and water from the endless seas combined continuously across the planet. Slowly, matter began moving toward greater complexity. Carbon played an especially important role in this ancient world. Unlike many other elements, carbon could form long, stable chains capable of connecting into more complicated structures. Over immense periods of time, these carbon-based molecules drifted through the oceans alongside other chemicals, combining in countless different ways. Most combinations vanished quickly, yet some lasted longer than others. Inside shallow pools near volcanic shores, water sometimes evaporated beneath the heat of the young sun, leaving chemicals concentrated together across wet mineral surfaces. In other places, warm underwater vents created pockets of energy deep beneath the sea floor where molecules could gather and interact for long periods of time. The oceans were filled with possibilities. Still, nothing alive yet existed. No cell protected these ancient chemicals. No DNA carried instructions through the seas. The Earth remained trapped in the long boundary between lifeless matter and the first beginnings of biology. But slowly, the line between the two was becoming less clear. Tiny molecular chains began appearing more frequently within the ancient waters. Some could attract other molecules around them. Others folded into delicate shapes held together by the chemistry of the oceans themselves. Warm currents carried these structures through the darkness, while volcanic heat continued reshaping the environment around them. The process remained incredibly fragile. Most structures survived only briefly before collapsing apart once again. But the Earth continued providing endless opportunities for chemistry to begin again. Across millions of years, the same reactions repeated endlessly beneath the ancient skies. Storms crossed the horizon. Rain fell into empty seas. Volcanoes glowed beneath the darkness. And within the warm oceans of the young Earth, chemistry slowly continued its long journey toward life. The ancient oceans stretched across almost the entire surface of the Earth. There were few stable continents in those distant ages. Much of the young planet remained covered by dark water beneath thick volcanic skies. From above, the Earth would have looked unfamiliar and strange. A world of endless storm clouds, black oceans, drifting steam, and glowing volcanic fire breaking through the darkness below. The sun itself appeared dimmer than it does today. Its light passed weakly through the heavy atmosphere, casting a faint reddish glow across the surface of the sea. For long periods of time, the planet may have appeared almost shadowed beneath layers of cloud and ash drifting through the sky. And still, beneath those silent waters, chemistry continued. The ancient oceans never rested. Warm currents carried minerals across enormous distances. Waves moved against empty volcanic shores. Deep below the surface, underwater vents released clouds of hot chemicals into the surrounding darkness, creating strange landscapes unlike anything found in the modern world. Around those vents, towering mineral structures slowly formed on the seafloor. Heated water rose upward through cracks in the crust, carrying iron, sulfur, and other dissolved materials from deep inside the Earth. When the hot water touched the colder ocean around it, dark clouds spread outward beneath the sea like smoke drifting through the darkness. Some scientists believe these hidden environments may have played an important role in the origin of life. Unlike the violent surface above, the deep oceans provided stability. Temperatures changed more slowly there. Minerals collected continuously around the vents. Tiny pockets inside porous rock formations may have trapped simple molecules together for long periods of time, allowing increasingly complex chemistry to unfold. The Earth itself seemed to be creating places where matter could slowly organize. Elsewhere across the planet, shallow coastlines experienced their own cycles of change. Water moved in and out across warm, mineral-rich shores. Pools formed beneath volcanic landscapes, then partially dried beneath the heat of the young sun before filling once again with rainwater and seawater. Again and again the same process repeated. Molecules gathered together, separated apart, then gathered once more. Over immense stretches of time, these repeating cycles may have helped increasingly complex chemical structures emerge within the ancient world. The young Earth was still silent. No living creature observed these events. No eyes watched the storms crossing the oceans. The chemistry unfolded alone beneath the dark skies of the early planet. And yet, something extraordinary was slowly approaching. Some molecules had begun lasting longer than before. Certain chemical structures proved more stable inside the ancient seas. Tiny chains formed that could influence the reactions occurring around them. The boundary between simple chemistry and the first hints of biology continued growing thinner. Still, the process remained unimaginably slow. Millions of years passed while the oceans continued drifting beneath the storm-filled skies. Entire volcanic islands rose and disappeared beneath the waves. Meteors occasionally struck the planet, temporarily reshaping parts of the environment before the Earth slowly settled once again into darkness and rain. But the chemistry always returned. Again and again, the oceans continued their endless experiments. Carbon drifted through the waters beside hydrogen and nitrogen. Energy from lightning and volcanic heat continuously reshaped molecular structures across the planet. Deep beneath the oceans, mineral-rich vents continued releasing warmth into the darkness below. The conditions for life were slowly assembling piece by piece, not through sudden creation, but through endless repetition across immense spans of time. And somewhere within those ancient waters, among the drifting molecules and volcanic seas, a new possibility was beginning to emerge. For the first time in Earth's history, matter was slowly moving toward the ability to copy itself. The age of chemistry was approaching something entirely new. Long before the first true cell appeared, the ancient Earth had already become a world filled with restless chemistry. Across the warm oceans, molecules drifted endlessly through the dark waters of the young planet. Some existed only briefly before breaking apart again. Others survived longer, carried slowly through the seas by ancient currents moving beneath volcanic skies. The Earth remained silent. And yet beneath that silence, matter itself was beginning to behave in unfamiliar ways. The oceans of the early world were filled with energy. Lightning storms continued crossing the atmosphere above. Volcanoes released heat from deep inside the planet. Along the ocean floor, hydrothermal vents pushed mineral-rich water into the surrounding darkness. Every part of the Earth seemed to provide another opportunity for chemistry to continue evolving toward greater complexity. Slowly, simple molecules began forming larger structures. Carbon chains linked together inside the warm seas. Certain molecules naturally attracted one another, gathering into delicate arrangements held together by the conditions of the ancient environment. Some folded into stable patterns, others surrounded themselves with thin outer layers resembling primitive membranes. Most still disappeared quickly, but not all of them. Over immense stretches of time, some molecular structures proved more stable than others. Certain combinations lasted longer inside the oceans. The chemistry of the Earth slowly began favoring structures capable of surviving within the harsh conditions of the young planet. Without realizing it, the ancient world had already begun following the earliest principles of selection. Not biological selection yet, but chemical selection. The molecules most capable of remaining stable continued existing longer within the oceans. Those that broke apart vanished back into the ancient waters. Again and again, the process repeated itself across millions of years. The Earth was slowly sorting chemistry. Some scientists believe mineral surfaces may have played an important role during this period. Tiny crystals and porous rocks beneath shallow waters could have provided places where molecules gathered closely together. Instead of drifting endlessly through the open ocean, chemicals became concentrated within small spaces where increasingly complicated interactions became possible. Inside these hidden environments, molecular chains slowly grew longer. The process remained fragile and uncertain. A slight change in temperature could destroy delicate structures immediately. Violent ocean currents could scatter chemical arrangements apart. Volcanic eruptions and meteor impacts constantly reshaped the surface of the young world. And still, chemistry continued returning. The oceans never stopped experimenting. Across empty shorelines and deep underwater vents, molecules continued colliding again and again beneath the dark skies of the ancient Earth. Some structures became increasingly complex. Tiny membrane-like layers occasionally surrounded clusters of chemicals, briefly separating an inside environment from the larger ocean beyond. For short moments, parts of the ancient chemistry became isolated from the outside world. These primitive boundaries were not alive. They possessed no awareness, no metabolism, no ability to reproduce. Yet they represented something new, a small step toward the organization that life would eventually require. The boundary between chemistry and biology continued growing thinner. Millions of years passed while the Earth remained trapped in this strange intermediate state. The oceans contained no living organisms, yet the chemistry unfolding within them no longer resembled ordinary, lifeless matter. Complexity was slowly increasing. Warm tides carried delicate molecular structures through the darkness beneath the waves. Volcanic heat continued rising from below the seafloor. Lightning flashed endlessly above distant horizons while the chemistry of the planet drifted forward through immense stretches of time. The process was almost unimaginably slow. Entire coastlines formed and vanished while the oceans continued their silent work. Mountains rose from volcanic fire and slowly eroded back into the sea. Clouds moved endlessly across skies untouched by oxygen or life. And within the ancient waters, some molecules had begun doing something remarkable. They were starting to influence the creation of copies of themselves. Not perfectly, not reliably, but enough for the first foundations of replication to begin emerging inside the silent oceans of the young Earth. The ancient oceans continued drifting beneath dark volcanic skies while the chemistry of the Earth slowly moved towards something entirely new. For millions of years, molecules had formed and disappeared across the planet without direction or memory. Chemical reactions unfolded endlessly inside shallow pools, along empty coastlines, and deep beneath the sea near volcanic vents. Most structures remained temporary, dissolving back into the ancient waters almost as quickly as they appeared. But slowly, certain molecular arrangements began lasting longer than others. Some possessed shapes that allowed them to attract nearby chemicals from the surrounding environment. Others folded into stable patterns capable of surviving inside the harsh conditions of the early Earth. The oceans continued testing countless combinations across immense stretches of time. Then, somewhere within those ancient waters, chemistry crossed another small threshold. Certain molecules may have begun assisting in the creation of rough copies of themselves. Not true reproduction yet, not life, but the first fragile hints of replication. Scientists still do not fully understand how this process began. The events took place so far back in Earth's history that almost no direct evidence remains. The ancient oceans have long disappeared. The rocks from that distant world have been broken apart, buried, melted, and reshaped by billions of years of planetary change. Yet many researchers believe molecules similar to RNA may have played an important role during this stage of Earth's history. Unlike simpler chemicals drifting through the oceans, RNA-like molecules possessed unusual abilities. They could store information within their structure while also influencing chemical reactions around them. In the right conditions, these ancient molecular chains may have helped guide the assembly of rough copies using materials floating nearby in the surrounding water. The process would have been slow and highly unstable. Most copies were probably incomplete or damaged, Many would have collapsed apart almost immediately. But the oceans contained unimaginable amounts of time. Even rare events could eventually become important when repeated across millions upon millions of years. Slowly, the chemistry of the Earth began changing. For the first time, certain molecular structures no longer vanished entirely when conditions shifted around them. Copies allowed patterns to continue existing beyond the destruction of individual molecules. Information, primitive and fragile, could now persist within the ancient world. The oceans had begun remembering. Not consciously, not intelligently, but chemically. Across the silent planet, tiny molecular systems continued competing against the harsh environment surrounding them. Some structures proved more stable, others copied more efficiently. Certain arrangements survived longer beneath the conditions of the ancient seas. Without life yet existing, the foundations of evolution had already begun. The process remained invisible within the vastness of the planet. No forests covered the land. No animals moved beneath the oceans. The earth still appeared empty and silent beneath its dark skies. Yet hidden deep within the warm waters, chemistry was becoming increasingly organized. Some molecular systems gathered within primitive membrane-like boundaries that separated them slightly from the surrounding ocean. Inside these fragile structures, certain reactions may have unfolded more efficiently than before. Molecules capable of assisting replication remained closer together instead of drifting endlessly apart through the sea. The ancient world was slowly creating environments where complexity could continue increasing. Again and again, fragile systems formed. Most disappeared. Some endured slightly longer, and across immense stretches of time, the chemistry capable of surviving continued accumulating small advantages over chemistry that could not. The Earth itself had become a slow and patient filter. Storms continued crossing the horizon above empty seas. Volcanic heat rose endlessly from beneath the oceans. Meteor impacts occasionally disturbed the fragile balance of the young world before darkness and rain slowly returned once again. Through it all, replication continued improving. Tiny molecular patterns drifted through the ancient waters carrying the earliest foundations of inheritance. Imperfect copies created variation. Stability allowed persistence. The conditions for selection slowly strengthened across the oceans of the young Earth. The boundary between chemistry and biology was now becoming dangerously thin. For hundreds of millions of years, the planet had remained silent and lifeless beneath its volcanic skies. But now, hidden within the warm darkness of the oceans, matter itself had begun following patterns once thought possible only for living things. The first true ancestor of life was drawing closer. And somewhere within the ancient seas, the earliest path toward the first cell had already begun. By now, the ancient Earth had changed in subtle but important ways. The planet was still harsh and unstable. Volcanoes continued erupting across the surface. Thick clouds moved endlessly through the atmosphere. Lightning flashed above dark oceans where no animal yet swam and no plant yet grew. But deep within those silent waters, chemistry was no longer random in the way it once had been. Some molecular systems had begun carrying patterns forward through time. For countless ages, the oceans of the Earth had acted like enormous laboratories, endlessly mixing chemicals together beneath heat, pressure, and electrical storms. Most reactions still vanished quickly. Most structures still collapsed apart almost immediately. Yet certain molecules now possessed an extraordinary advantage. They could help create imperfect copies of themselves. This ability changed everything. For the first time in the history of the Earth, information could survive beyond the destruction of individual molecules. Patterns no longer needed to begin from nothing each time chemistry unfolded. Replication allowed successful structures to persist while unsuccessful ones disappeared back into the oceans. The ancient world had entered a new stage. Scientists often describe this period as the possible beginning of an RNA world, a distant age before DNA, before proteins, and before true cells fully existed. In this ancient environment, RNA-like molecules may have acted as both carriers of information and participants in chemical reactions at the same time. Modern life still carries traces of this forgotten era. Even now, deep inside every living cell on Earth, RNA continues helping transfer information and guide essential biological processes. Some scientists believe it may be a surviving echo from the earliest stages of life itself. But on the young Earth, these primitive molecular systems were still fragile beyond imagination. Replication was slow and highly inaccurate. Many copies formed incorrectly. Others broke apart before they could continue the process further. The oceans remained chaotic and violent. Heat, radiation, volcanic activity, and changing chemistry constantly threatened the delicate structures drifting through the ancient seas. And still, replication continued. Again and again, molecular chains formed inside shallow pools, along mineral surfaces, and near warm volcanic vents beneath the ocean floor. Some systems survived slightly longer than others. Certain structures proved more stable within the changing conditions of the planet. Tiny advantages slowly accumulated. The Earth itself had become an environment where selection could occur long before true organisms existed. Molecular systems capable of persistence remained present within the oceans, while unstable systems vanished. In a sense, the earliest form of evolution had already begun before life itself fully appeared. The process remained invisible across the vastness of the world. Storms crossed empty oceans. Rain continued falling across barren coastlines. Volcanic mountains rose from the darkness and slowly collapsed back into the sea. And hidden beneath those ancient skies, the chemistry of the Earth continued organizing itself into increasingly complex forms. Some primitive membrane-like structures now trapped groups of molecules together inside tiny, enclosed spaces. These fragile boundaries separated certain reactions from the surrounding environment, allowing molecular systems to interact more efficiently than before. For brief periods, miniature chemical worlds existed within the larger oceans beyond. Most still disappeared quickly, but not all of them. Over immense stretches of time, systems capable of maintaining stability continued surviving longer within the ancient environment. Replication slowly improved. Chemical reactions became more organized. Primitive molecular networks began interacting in increasingly complicated ways. The oceans were approaching another threshold. Somewhere within the darkness of the young Earth, chemistry was slowly preparing to become biology. The first true living systems had not yet appeared, but the distance separating lifeless matter from life itself was becoming smaller with every passing million years. For hundreds of millions of years, the Earth had remained a world of stone, water, and chemistry. Now, slowly, something else was beginning to emerge. The ancient oceans still appeared empty beneath the dark skies of the young planet. No creature moved through the seas. No forests covered the continents. From above, the Earth would still have seemed silent and lifeless. Yet hidden within the warm waters, molecular systems had begun behaving in ways once impossible for ordinary matter. They could persist. They could change. And in primitive ways, they could reproduce. The process remained unstable and fragile beyond anything alive today could survive. These early replicators were not organisms in the modern sense. They possessed no cells, no metabolism, and no awareness of the world around them. They existed only as delicate chains of chemistry drifting through the oceans of the ancient Earth. But they carried something revolutionary: information. For the first time, successful molecular patterns could continue existing across generations of copies. Tiny chemical systems no longer vanished completely when individual structures broke apart. Replication allowed certain arrangements to remain present within the world for longer periods of time. The oceans had begun preserving memory within matter itself. Imperfect copies created variation between molecular systems. Some changes made structures less stable, causing them to disappear quickly. Others accidentally improved survival or replication. Over immense stretches of time, tiny advantages slowly spread through the ancient chemistry of the planet. The foundations of natural selection were now unfolding inside the silent oceans long before the appearance of true life. The Earth had crossed an invisible boundary. Not fully alive yet, but no longer entirely lifeless. Scientists still debate exactly where this transition occurred. There may never have been a single moment when chemistry suddenly became biology. Instead, the transformation was likely gradual, a slow continuum unfolding across millions of years inside the oceans of the young Earth. Certain molecular systems became increasingly organized. Primitive membranes surrounded clusters of chemicals, separating internal reactions from the larger environment beyond. Some structures absorbed energy from their surroundings more effectively. Others maintained stability longer inside the violent conditions of the ancient planet. Step by step, complexity increased. The oceans continued acting as enormous laboratories where countless experiments unfolded simultaneously across the world. Along volcanic coastlines, within shallow mineral pools, and deep beneath the sea near hydrothermal vents, molecular systems constantly formed, interacted, and disappeared. Most failed, but the Earth had time for failure. Again and again, chemistry continued searching through endless possibilities beneath the dark skies of the early world. Warm currents carried fragile structures through the seas. Lightning flashed above distant horizons. Volcanic heat rose continuously from below the ocean floor. The young Earth remained violent and unstable, yet those same harsh conditions also supplied the energy necessary for complexity to continue growing. The ancient planet was slowly teaching matter how to survive. Some molecular systems now possessed several important traits at once. They could maintain boundaries. They could store primitive information. They could influence chemical reactions around them. And most importantly, they could produce imperfect copies capable of continuing the process further. The line separating chemistry from life had become almost impossible to see. Somewhere within those warm, ancient oceans, the first true ancestor of every living thing on Earth was drawing closer. Not a creature anyone would recognize, not an animal or plant, only a tiny and fragile system drifting through the darkness beneath volcanic skies. Yet from that distant beginning, every forest, every ocean creature, every dinosaur, every bird, and eventually, every human being would one day descend. The silent Earth was approaching the moment when the planet would become alive for the very first time. At some distant moment hidden deep within the ancient history of the Earth, something extraordinary finally appeared inside the dark oceans of the young world. The first true living cell. No human being witnessed that moment. No sound marked its arrival beneath the silent seas. The Earth itself continued drifting through space exactly as before. Storms crossed the skies. Volcanoes glowed along the horizon. Warm currents moved slowly through the ancient oceans. And yet the planet had changed forever. For billions of years, the universe had contained stars, planets, gas, stone, and chemistry. Molecules had formed and broken apart across countless worlds. But now, within the warm oceans of the Earth, matter had organized itself into something entirely new, something alive. Scientists still do not know exactly how the first living cell emerged from the chemistry of the ancient planet. The transition may have occurred gradually across immense stretches of time. There may never have been a single clear boundary between non-living chemistry and the earliest forms of biology. Yet eventually, somewhere within the oceans of the young Earth, molecular systems crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. Primitive membranes surrounded delicate internal chemistry, separating it from the environment beyond. Inside these fragile boundaries, chemical reactions became increasingly organized and self-sustaining. Molecules capable of storing information continued passing patterns forward through replication. Energy from the surrounding world was absorbed and used to maintain internal stability. For the first time, chemistry was no longer merely reacting to the environment. It was surviving within it. The earliest living cells were unimaginably simple compared to modern life. They possessed no nucleus, no complex internal structures. They drifted through the ancient oceans as tiny microscopic organisms invisible to the naked eye. And yet they carried within them the foundations of every living system that would ever exist on Earth. These primitive cells likely resembled ancient microbes more than anything else. They floated through warm, mineral-rich waters beneath volcanic skies, untouched by oxygen. Some they have gathered near hydrothermal vents deep beneath the oceans, where heat and chemistry remained stable. Others drifted through shallow coastal environments shaped by tides and storms. The Earth was no longer silent. Life had entered the world quietly, almost invisibly, through microscopic organisms hidden within the ancient seas. No forests appeared suddenly across the land. No great creatures emerged from the oceans. For millions of years, the only life on Earth remained tiny and simple beyond imagination. But everything had changed. For the first time in planetary history, information could survive continuously through living generations. Cells could grow, divide, and produce descendants carrying variations of the same ancient chemistry forward through time. The age of biology had begun. The young Earth still remained dangerous. Meteor impacts occasionally struck the planet. Volcanoes reshaped coastlines and ocean floors. Radiation from the sun continued reaching the surface beneath skies without ozone protection. Conditions across the world constantly shifted between stability and catastrophe. Most early organisms likely vanished quickly. Entire populations may have disappeared countless times, while the first ecosystems struggled to survive within the unstable environment of the young Earth. Yet life possessed one extraordinary advantage that ordinary chemistry never had. It could adapt. Imperfect replication created variation between organisms. Some cells survived better within changing conditions. Others used available energy more efficiently. Over immense periods of time, tiny advantages accumulated through the process of natural selection. The first living world remained microscopic, but evolution had already begun reshaping the planet. Slowly, generation after generation, life spread through the ancient oceans. Tiny cells drifted beneath volcanic skies, while warm currents carried them across the dark seas of the early Earth. Deep below the surface, hydrothermal vents continued releasing heat and minerals into the surrounding water. Along shallow coastlines, primitive organisms multiplied within warm tidal environments. The ancient chemistry of the Earth had finally awakened into biology. And from these tiny beginnings, every living thing that would ever exist on the planet was already beginning its long journey through time. The first living cells were tiny beyond imagination. If a human could have traveled back across billions of years to witness the ancient Earth, they would not have seen forests, fish, or strange prehistoric creatures moving through the oceans. The world would still appear almost empty. Dark seas stretched beneath volcanic skies, while storms crossed the horizon above barren continents of stone. And yet, life was there. Invisible to the naked eye, microscopic organisms drifted through the warm waters of the young planet. They floated near hydrothermal vents deep beneath the oceans. They gathered along mineral-rich coastlines shaped by tides and volcanic heat. Quietly and slowly, the first living systems on Earth began multiplying across the ancient seas. These primitive organisms were unlike modern life in almost every way. They possessed no complex internal structures, no eyes or limbs, no nervous systems. They were little more than tiny membranes surrounding fragile chemistry capable of maintaining itself and producing imperfect copies through replication. But despite their simplicity, they carried within them one remarkable achievement: continuity. For the first time in Earth's history, life could persist through generations. A living cell could divide, passing information into new cells that continued the process further. The ancient chemistry that had once drifted randomly through the oceans now existed inside organisms capable of survival, replication, and adaptation. The Earth had become a living planet. Scientists believe all life alive today may descend from a distant, ancient population often called Luca, the last universal common ancestor. Luca was not the very first organism, but rather a primitive form of life from which all modern living things eventually evolved. Every tree, every whale, every bird crossing the sky, every human being. All may share a connection to those ancient microscopic ancestors drifting through the oceans billions of years ago. The idea is almost impossible to fully understand. Inside every living cell on Earth today, traces of that distant beginning still remain. The same genetic code shared across modern life suggests that all organisms ultimately inherited their biology from the same ancient evolutionary roots. Even now, the chemistry inside the human body still carries echoes of the ancient Earth. The oceans themselves may have shaped life in ways that remain visible today. Human blood contains dissolved salts in proportions strangely similar to seawater. The minerals once drifting through the ancient oceans continue playing essential roles inside living cells across the modern world. Life never fully escaped its origins. The first ecosystems on Earth remained extremely simple for immense stretches of time. Tiny organisms drifted through the seas while evolution slowly experimented across countless generations. Some microbes learned to survive near volcanic heat deep beneath the oceans. Others adapted to conditions near the surface where sunlight touched the water above. Slowly, diversity increased. Natural selection continued shaping life across millions upon millions of years. Cells capable of surviving more effectively left behind more descendants. Tiny changes accumulated generation after generation while the biosphere of the young Earth slowly expanded. The process remained incredibly slow. Entire mountain ranges rose and vanished while microscopic life continued evolving beneath the ancient skies. Continents shifted across the planet. Oceans opened and closed. Volcanoes reshaped the surface of the Earth again and again. And still, the tiny descendants of the first cells endured. Life had gained a permanent foothold on the planet. The Earth was no longer merely a world of rock and water drifting silently through space. The oceans now contained organisms capable of adaptation, replication, and evolution. For the first time in cosmic history, the planet carried systems able to preserve information and change over time. The transformation had begun quietly within microscopic cells hidden beneath dark seas, yet eventually those tiny organisms would reshape the atmosphere, alter the oceans, and prepare the world for every complex creature still waiting far in the future. The age of life had only just begun. For a very long time, the Earth belonged only to microbes. There were no forests covering the continents, no fish moved through the seas, no insects crossed the land or birds traveled through the skies. The world remained quiet and almost entirely empty except for microscopic life drifting through the ancient oceans. And this age lasted not for thousands or millions of years, but for billions. The first living organisms spread slowly across the warm seas of the young Earth. Tiny cells multiplied generation after generation beneath volcanic skies, while natural selection quietly shaped their evolution through immense stretches of time. The planet itself continued changing around them. Volcanoes rose from the oceans and collapsed back beneath the waves. Continents slowly shifted across the surface of the Earth. Meteor impacts occasionally disturbed the fragile stability of the world before the oceans calmed once again beneath dark clouds and endless rain. Through it all, microbial life endured. These ancient organisms were incredibly simple compared to modern creatures, yet they possessed remarkable abilities for survival. Some lived near hydrothermal vents deep beneath the ocean floor where volcanic heat poured continuously into the surrounding water. Others survived in shallow coastal regions exposed to changing tides, sunlight, and shifting temperatures. Life adapted to nearly every environment the young Earth provided. The oceans of this distant world looked very different from modern seas. The atmosphere still contained almost no oxygen. Iron drifted in enormous quantities through the water, giving parts of the oceans a dark green appearance beneath the dim, ancient sunlight. Volcanic gases filled the skies while warm currents moved endlessly across the planet. And hidden throughout those waters, microscopic organisms continued multiplying silently. Many early microbes likely survived by feeding on chemicals released from volcanic environments. Near hydrothermal vents deep beneath the oceans, mineral-rich water provided energy that primitive organisms could use to sustain themselves. Entire ecosystems may have formed around these dark underwater landscapes long before sunlight became important for life on Earth. In many ways, the deep oceans protected the earliest living systems. Far below the surface, temperatures remained relatively stable. Water shielded organisms from harmful radiation reaching the planet beneath the thin atmosphere of the young Earth. Around volcanic vents, warmth and chemistry created environments where microbial life could survive even during periods when surface conditions became unstable. The ancient seas became the cradle of biology. Generation after generation, tiny organisms drifted through the oceans while evolution slowly experimented through variation and selection. Some microbes reproduced more efficiently. Others adapted to extreme heat, darkness, or chemical-rich environments. Small changes accumulated across unimaginable spans of time. The Earth remained a microbial world. If someone could have traveled across the planet during this era, they might still believe the Earth was lifeless at first glance. The continents remained barren and empty. Waves moved silently against rocky shores, untouched by plants or animals. Beneath the skies, no large creature existed anywhere on the planet. Yet the oceans were alive. Invisible ecosystems covered the ancient world. Thin microbial mats spread across shallow coastal regions where colonies of microorganisms trapped minerals and sediment together, layer by layer. Deep beneath the seas, primitive life gathered near volcanic vents hidden within total darkness. Across the planet, countless microscopic organisms drifted through warm currents beneath the dim, ancient sun. Life had become part of the Earth itself. Slowly, almost invisibly, these tiny organisms were beginning to alter the planet around them. The chemistry of the ocean started changing as microbial populations expanded. Ancient ecosystems influenced the movement of carbon, sulfur, and other elements through the environment. The transformation remained slow, beyond comprehension. Millions of years passed while microbial life quietly continued reshaping the young Earth beneath volcanic skies. The planet still appeared ancient and alien compared to the modern world. But hidden within those microscopic oceans, evolution was already preparing for another extraordinary change. Some organisms were beginning to discover a new source of energy: sunlight. The microbial world of the ancient Earth was quiet, invisible, and astonishingly resilient. For billions of years, microscopic organisms remained the only life forms on the planet. While continents shifted and oceans changed shape, these tiny living cells continued surviving beneath the dark skies of the young world. They adapted to heat, to pressure, to darkness. to environments that would destroy most modern life almost instantly. Some ancient microbes lived near hydrothermal vents where superheated water rose from deep cracks in the ocean floor. Around these vents, volcanic heat and dissolved minerals created strange underwater landscapes hidden far beneath the surface of the sea. Even today, similar environments still exist in Earth's oceans. Towering black vents release clouds of mineral-rich water into the surrounding darkness, while entire ecosystems survive around them without sunlight. Strange bacteria feed on chemicals rising from beneath the planet itself, preserving a glimpse of the ancient biological world that may once have dominated the Earth billions of years ago. The first life did not necessarily depend on sunlight. Long before forests covered the continents or algae filled the oceans with oxygen, many organisms survived entirely through chemistry. Primitive microbes absorbed energy from sulfur, iron, methane, and other substances released from volcanic environments deep beneath the seas. The ancient Earth was a chemical world before it became a green world. Slowly, microbial ecosystems spread across the planet. Thin layers of microorganisms formed vast colonies along shallow coastlines where warm water moved gently across mineral-rich surfaces. These ancient microbial mats trapped sediment, layer by layer, slowly building strange, stone-like structures known today as stromatolites. Some stromatolites still exist on Earth even now. In certain remote coastal regions, living microbial communities continue forming structures remarkably similar to those built billions of years ago by some of the earliest organisms on the planet. They are among the oldest surviving biological traditions in Earth's history. Quiet echoes from a world long vanished. The microbial age unfolded with unimaginable slowness. Generation after generation passed while life remained microscopic. Evolution continued experimenting through endless variation and natural selection across spans of time so enormous they are difficult for the human mind to fully understand. Entire oceans changed chemistry while microbes continued drifting through the seas. Mountain ranges rose and eroded away. Continents broke apart and reformed. And still, life remained small. Yet beneath that simplicity, evolution was steadily building greater complexity. Tiny changes accumulated across billions of years while ancient organisms adapted to new environments and discovered new ways to survive. Some microbes became especially important in the future history of the Earth. Certain ancient organisms evolved the ability to capture energy directly from sunlight through a process that would eventually transform the entire planet: photosynthesis. At first, the change may have seemed small. Tiny cells floating near the ocean surface began using sunlight to power chemical reactions inside their bodies. Slowly, these organisms spread through shallow marine environments where light reached the warm waters above. But photosynthesis carried enormous consequences for the future of the Earth. As these microbes multiplied across the oceans, they released a new substance into the environment as a byproduct of their biology: oxygen. At first, the oxygen disappeared quickly into the oceans and surrounding rocks. Iron dissolved in seawater absorbed enormous amounts of it. Ancient minerals reacted chemically with the new gas before it could accumulate within the atmosphere. Yet the process continued. Generation after generation, photosynthetic microbes quietly released more oxygen into the world. The ancient Earth was approaching one of the greatest transformations in planetary history. A world once ruled entirely by volcanic chemistry and dark oceans was slowly beginning to change because of microscopic life invisible to the naked eye. Tiny organisms drifting beneath the ancient sun were preparing to reshape the atmosphere, alter the oceans, and transform the future of life forever. For most of Earth's early history, the atmosphere contained almost no oxygen. The skies above the ancient oceans were filled instead with volcanic gases, methane, carbon dioxide, and drifting clouds of ash and steam. Life had already existed for billions of years, yet the planet still remained alien compared to the modern world. Most organisms alive during this distant age could not survive in oxygen-rich environments at all. Then slowly, almost invisibly, the Earth began to change. Tiny photosynthetic microbes drifting near the ocean surface continued capturing energy from sunlight generation after generation. As they absorbed light from the ancient sun, they released oxygen into the surrounding environment as part of their biology. At first, almost none of it remained in the atmosphere. The ancient oceans absorbed enormous quantities of oxygen as dissolved iron reacted chemically with the gas. Across the seas, iron-rich waters slowly transformed, forming vast layers of rust-colored minerals that settled onto the ocean floor over immense stretches of time. Even today, ancient rock formations around the world preserve evidence of this transformation. Hidden within layers of stone are enormous deposits of banded iron formations, silent geological records left behind by the first oxygen-producing organisms on Earth. These rocks remain among the oldest surviving traces of the moment when microscopic life began reshaping the planet itself. The process unfolded with extraordinary slowness. Millions upon millions of years passed while oxygen continued accumulating little by little within the oceans and atmosphere. Tiny microbes drifting through shallow seas quietly altered the chemistry of the Earth through their everyday survival. No great catastrophe announced the change. No massive explosion transformed the skies overnight. The revolution occurred gradually beneath ancient sunlight while microbial colonies spread across the warm oceans of the world. Eventually, however, oxygen levels rose high enough that the planet could no longer absorb it all. For the first time in Earth's history, free oxygen began collecting within the atmosphere. The consequences were enormous. To many ancient organisms, oxygen was toxic. Life forms adapted to the earlier chemical world suddenly faced an environment becoming increasingly dangerous for their survival. Entire ecosystems that had once dominated the planet may have collapsed as oxygen spread through the oceans and skies. The Great Oxygenation Event had begun. It remains one of the most important biological transformations in the history of the Earth. Tiny microbes, invisible to the naked eye, were changing the chemistry of the atmosphere, altering the oceans, and transforming the future of life itself. The planet that had once been dominated by volcanic gases and chemical seas slowly became more recognizable to the modern world. The skies gradually cleared, the chemistry of the oceans shifted, and high above the Earth, oxygen accumulating within the atmosphere eventually helped form a protective ozone layer that shielded the surface from dangerous solar radiation. For billions of years, the sun's harsh radiation had limited life primarily to the oceans and protected environments. But now, slowly, conditions across the planet were becoming less hostile. The Earth was preparing for a future far more complex than the tiny microbial world that still dominated the seas. Yet during this ancient age, the transformation remained almost entirely invisible. The continents were still barren stone. No trees moved in the wind, no animals crossed the land. Only microscopic organisms drifting through the oceans beneath ancient sunlight continued quietly changing the world around them. And through their endless generations of survival, evolution was opening possibilities that had never existed before in Earth's history. The age of simple life was slowly giving way to something new. The rise of oxygen changed the Earth forever. For billions of years, the planet had existed as a world of volcanic skies, iron-rich oceans, and microscopic life adapted to a harsh chemical environment. Now, slowly and irreversibly, biology itself was reshaping the atmosphere of the Earth. Tiny organisms drifting through shallow seas had become a planetary force. Generation after generation, photosynthetic microbes continued releasing oxygen into the oceans and skies. At first, the gas reacted with dissolved minerals and exposed rock across the planet, but eventually oxygen production exceeded what the Earth could absorb. The atmosphere began transforming. The process unfolded slowly across unimaginable stretches of time. No single generation of microbes could witness the full scale of the change taking place around them. Yet over millions upon millions of years, the chemistry of the world shifted because of the accumulated activity of microscopic life. The skies themselves became different. As oxygen levels slowly increased, methane within the atmosphere declined. Some scientists believe this may have dramatically altered Earth's climate. The planet that had once remained warm beneath thick greenhouse gases may have cooled significantly during certain periods of the oxygen revolution. Ancient ice spread across parts of the world. Some researchers believe the Earth may even have entered episodes of extreme global glaciation, where enormous regions of the planet froze beneath expanding ice sheets. The causes remain debated, but the rise of oxygen-producing organisms may have played an important role in changing the balance of the atmosphere itself. Life was no longer simply adapting to the Earth. Life was transforming it. This marked one of the greatest turning points in planetary history. Before biology appeared, the environment shaped chemistry and survival. But now living organisms had become powerful enough to alter the oceans, atmosphere, and climate of the entire planet through their collective existence. The Earth and life had become deeply connected systems. Meanwhile, oxygen also created entirely new possibilities for evolution. Some organisms gradually adapted to survive within the changing environment. Over immense periods of time, certain cells evolved ways to use oxygen itself as part of their metabolism. This allowed life to produce energy far more efficiently than before. The consequences would eventually reshape the future of biology. More available energy meant greater complexity could become possible. Cells could maintain increasingly sophisticated internal systems. New evolutionary pathways slowly opened across the ancient world, while oxygen continued accumulating within the atmosphere above. Yet the Earth still remained a microbial planet. No forests covered the continents, no animals swam through the seas. The oceans were still dominated by microscopic life drifting beneath the sunlight of the ancient Earth. But hidden within those tiny cells, evolution was already preparing for another extraordinary leap forward. Some organisms began forming cooperative relationships with one another. Instead of surviving independently, certain cells started living together in ways that benefited both sides. Over immense spans of time, these partnerships grew increasingly permanent. One of the most important events in biological history may have emerged from these ancient relationships. Primitive cells capable of using oxygen efficiently were absorbed by larger cells and continued surviving inside them. Instead of being destroyed, the two organisms evolved together. Eventually, these ancient partnerships gave rise to structures known today as mitochondria, the energy-producing systems still found inside nearly every complex cell on Earth. Even now, the human body carries traces of this ancient union. Inside almost every human cell are mitochondria descended from ancient microorganisms that formed cooperative relationships billions of years ago in the oceans of the early Earth. The history of life still lives inside us. Slowly, the ancient microbial world continued moving toward greater complexity beneath skies that had been permanently transformed by oxygen. The atmosphere became more stable. The ozone layer strengthened. New ecological opportunities emerged across the planet. The Earth that once seemed silent and lifeless was becoming increasingly alive with possibility. And deep within the ancient oceans, evolution was preparing for the rise of the first truly complex cells. For billions of years, life on Earth remained simple. Tiny microbial organisms drifted through the oceans while evolution slowly transformed the planet around them. The atmosphere changed. Oxygen accumulated within the skies. The chemistry of the oceans shifted beneath the influence of microscopic life. And still, the Earth remained a world without complex creatures. Yet hidden inside the ancient seas, evolution was continuing its slow and patient work. Some cells had already begun using oxygen to produce energy more efficiently than earlier organisms. Others formed cooperative relationships that allowed different biological systems to survive together inside the same microscopic world. Over immense stretches of time, these partnerships led to one of the most important transitions in the history of life: the rise of complex cells. Unlike the simpler organisms that had dominated the Earth for billions of years, these new cells possessed organized internal structures separated into specialized compartments. Information became stored more securely. Energy production became more efficient. Internal chemistry grew increasingly sophisticated. These organisms are known today as eukaryotic cells. Every plant, animal, and human being alive now is built from descendants of these ancient cellular systems that first emerged deep within the oceans of the early Earth. The transformation did not happen quickly. Millions upon millions of years passed while complex cells slowly evolved from simpler ancestors. Evolution continued through tiny variations accumulating generation after generation beneath the ancient skies of the planet. The Earth itself remained quiet and unfamiliar. The continents were still barren. No forests moved in the wind. The oceans contained no fish or giant marine creatures. Yet within microscopic ecosystems hidden beneath the surface, biology was becoming steadily more advanced. Complex cells possessed important advantages. Their internal organization allowed different biological functions to occur more efficiently at the same time. Some structures specialized in producing energy. Others stored information or managed chemical reactions inside the cell. This increasing complexity opened entirely new evolutionary possibilities. Life was slowly learning how to become larger and more sophisticated. The ancient oceans became worlds of invisible innovation. Microscopic organisms drifted through warm currents while natural selection continuously shaped their biology. Some cells developed flexible outer membranes capable of surrounding and absorbing smaller organisms. Others formed temporary colonies where groups of cells remained together after reproduction. The first foundations of cooperation were spreading through life itself. For billions of years, evolution had focused primarily on survival at the level of individual cells. Now, slowly, organisms were beginning to interact in more organized ways. Certain cells benefited from remaining connected instead of separating completely after division. At first, these arrangements remained simple and fragile. But over immense stretches of time, cellular cooperation continued becoming more stable and permanent. The Earth was approaching another extraordinary threshold. Some organisms had begun experimenting with the possibility of multicellular life. Tiny groups of connected cells drifted through the oceans beneath ancient sunlight, while evolution tested entirely new biological structures. Most remained extremely simple. Many failed quickly. Yet natural selection continued preserving systems that provided even the smallest advantages for survival. Again and again, the oceans became laboratories of experimentation. The process unfolded almost unimaginably slowly. Entire mountain ranges rose and vanished while microscopic life continued evolving beneath the skies. Continents drifted across the surface of the Earth. Oceans opened and closed. Ice ages may have spread across parts of the world before retreating once again. Through it all, evolution continued moving forward. The ancient microbial planet that had once contained only tiny isolated cells was slowly becoming a world where larger and more organized forms of life might finally become possible. And deep within the oceans of the Earth, the first true foundations of complex biological ecosystems were beginning to emerge. The story of life on Earth is not only a story of survival, it is also a story of cooperation. For billions of years, evolution shaped tiny organisms drifting independently through the ancient oceans. Single cells adapted to heat, darkness, changing chemistry, and the slow transformation of the planet itself. Natural selection favored organisms capable of surviving within the unstable conditions of the early Earth. Yet eventually, some forms of life began discovering advantages in remaining together. Instead of separating completely after reproduction, certain cells stayed connected. Groups of organisms formed simple colonies drifting through the oceans beneath ancient sunlight. At first, these arrangements were fragile and temporary, little more than clusters of identical cells surviving side by side within the same environment. But slowly, cooperation became more organized. Over immense stretches of time, cells inside these colonies began performing different tasks. Some specialized in movement. Others focused on gathering energy or processing nutrients from the surrounding environment. Gradually, biological systems emerged in which individual cells depended upon one another for survival. The foundations of multicellular life had begun. The transformation unfolded with extraordinary slowness. Millions upon millions of years passed while evolution continued experimenting with increasingly complex forms of organization inside the ancient oceans. Most attempts failed. Many early multicellular systems likely disappeared quickly, unable to survive changing conditions or compete against simpler organisms already well adapted to the microbial world. Yet evolution never stopped testing new possibilities. Again and again, the oceans became laboratories of biological experimentation. The Earth itself also continued changing during this distant era. Oxygen levels slowly increased within the atmosphere. The ozone layer strengthened high above the surface of the planet. The chemistry of the seas shifted while continents drifted gradually across the world. Conditions for complex life were improving. For billions of years, harmful solar radiation had limited life primarily to the oceans and protected environments. But as oxygen accumulated in the skies, the ozone layer provided increasing protection from the sun's radiation. Surface waters became safer for living organisms. New ecological opportunities spread across the ancient Earth. The planet was slowly becoming more hospitable to complexity. Meanwhile, within the oceans, multicellular organisms continued evolving into increasingly sophisticated forms. Tiny colonies developed stable structures capable of surviving longer and reproducing more effectively. Communication between cells improved. Internal coordination became more organized. Life was learning how to build bodies. At first, these organisms remained extremely simple compared to modern plants or animals. Many resembled soft, drifting colonies floating through shallow marine environments. Others spread across the sea floor as thin, layered structures absorbing nutrients from the surrounding waters. Yet even these primitive forms represented an extraordinary evolutionary achievement. For the first time, large groups of cells functioned together as unified living systems. The Earth had entered a new biological age. The ancient microbial world that once dominated the oceans alone was slowly giving way to more visible and organized forms of life. Complexity increased generation after generation, while evolution continued shaping new possibilities across immense spans of time. Still, the planet remained quiet compared to the modern world. No forests yet covered the continents. No birds crossed the skies. No mammals walked across the land. But beneath the oceans, evolution was preparing for one of the greatest transformations in the history of life. Soon, the seas of the Earth would begin filling with strange, multicellular organisms unlike anything the planet had ever seen before. The long age of invisible life was slowly coming to an end. For most of Earth's history, life had remained microscopic. Tiny organisms drifted invisibly through the oceans while evolution slowly transformed the chemistry of the atmosphere and seas. Billions of years passed before multicellular life finally began spreading across the planet in visible forms. Then, slowly, the ancient oceans began to change. Soft-bodied organisms appeared beneath the seas unlike anything that had existed before. Some rested quietly across the ocean floor. Others drifted slowly through shallow marine environments beneath ancient sunlight. The Earth was entering a strange and unfamiliar biological age. The first complex creatures had arrived. These organisms belonged to a distant world long before fish, dinosaurs, or mammals existed. Their bodies were soft and delicate, leaving behind only faint traces in the geological record. Many resembled leaf-like patterns, discs, fronds, or rippling shapes spread across ancient seabeds. Modern scientists still debate exactly what some of these creatures were. Certain organisms may represent early relatives of animals. Others could belong to evolutionary lineages that vanished entirely from the Earth long ago. Their biology often appears so unusual that they seem almost alien compared to modern life. Yet they were part of the same long evolutionary story that began billions of years earlier within the ancient microbial oceans. The seas of this distant world remained calm and quiet compared to later prehistoric ages. No giant predators hunted through the water. No complex food chains yet dominated marine ecosystems. Many organisms absorbed nutrients directly from the surrounding environment or survived through simple biological strategies unlike those of later animals. The ancient Earth still moved at a slower rhythm. Shallow oceans stretched across large regions of the planet while soft-bodied communities spread gently along the seafloor beneath dim sunlight. Microbial mats still covered parts of the ancient seabed, preserving traces of the older microbial world that had ruled the Earth for billions of years before. But now, evolution was beginning to experiment with entirely new possibilities. Bodies grew larger. Shapes became more complex. Cells organized themselves into increasingly specialized structures. The oceans that once contained only microscopic life now supported visible ecosystems spread across the ancient world. The transformation had taken unimaginable amounts of time. Billions of years had passed since the first living cells emerged within the warm oceans of the early Earth. Through endless cycles of variation and natural selection, life slowly learned how to build complexity from tiny beginnings. And still, evolution continued moving forward. Some early organisms developed primitive movement across the seafloor. Others formed branching structures that rose upward into the surrounding water. Different body plans appeared as evolution explored new ways for multicellular life to survive and reproduce within the oceans of the planet. The Earth itself remained almost silent above the waves. The continents were still barren and empty. Winds crossed rocky landscapes untouched by forests or grass. Rain fell across lifeless shorelines while most complex life remained hidden beneath the seas. Yet the oceans were becoming increasingly alive. Generation after generation, multicellular organisms spread through shallow marine environments beneath skies now rich with oxygen. Evolution accelerated as ecosystems grew more complicated and interactions between organisms became increasingly dynamic. The long microbial age of the Earth was slowly fading into the past. A new biological world was beginning to emerge beneath the ancient oceans. And soon, evolution would unleash forms of life more diverse and more extraordinary than anything the planet had ever seen before. The oceans of the Earth were no longer silent. For billions of years, life had existed mostly in microscopic form beneath the seas of the ancient planet. Tiny organisms drifted through the waters while evolution slowly transformed the atmosphere, chemistry, and biological possibilities of the Earth itself. Now, multicellular life was spreading across the oceans in increasingly visible forms. Soft-bodied organisms covered parts of the seafloor beneath shallow marine waters. Strange frond-like creatures swayed gently with ancient currents. Disc-shaped organisms rested upon microbial mats while primitive colonies drifted through the oceans beneath the sunlight of a changing world. The Earth was awakening into complexity. These early ecosystems remained very different from modern oceans. There were still no fish swimming through coral reefs, no sharks hunted through deep waters, no whales crossed the seas. The ancient marine world moved slowly, quietly, almost dreamlike beneath the oxygen-rich skies of the late Precambrian Earth. Yet evolution was preparing for dramatic change. As ecosystems became more complex, interactions between organisms also intensified. Life no longer existed only as isolated cells or simple colonies drifting passively through the environment. Organisms now competed for space, nutrients, and survival within increasingly crowded marine ecosystems. Natural selection accelerated. Small evolutionary advantages became more important as biological communities grew more diverse. Certain organisms developed stronger structures or more efficient methods for gathering nutrients. Others evolved primitive movement that allowed them to explore the seafloor or respond to changing conditions around them. The oceans had become active evolutionary worlds. Scientists sometimes call this period one of the great biological experiments in Earth's history. Many of the strange organisms that existed during this age left behind no direct descendants alive today. Entire evolutionary lineages appeared briefly within the ancient seas before vanishing forever from the planet. The history of life was filled with experimentation. Evolution did not move toward complexity through perfect design or predetermined progress. Countless biological forms emerged, adapted, and disappeared across immense spans of time, while the Earth itself continued changing around them. Still, some organisms carried features that hinted at the future of animal life. Primitive body symmetry appeared in certain species. Others developed specialized tissues or more organized internal structures. The foundations of mobility, sensory systems, and complex anatomy were slowly beginning to emerge within the oceans of the Earth. The transformation remained gradual beyond human comprehension. Millions of years passed while multicellular ecosystems continued expanding beneath the ancient seas. Continents drifted slowly across the planet. Ocean currents shifted. Climate changed over immense geological cycles, and through it all, evolution continued building greater complexity from the tiny beginnings of the first cells billions of years earlier. The Earth itself had become deeply alive. The atmosphere now contained oxygen produced by ancient microbial ancestors. The oceans supported increasingly diverse ecosystems. Biological activity influenced the chemistry of the planet on a global scale. Life and Earth had become inseparable parts of the same evolving system. Yet perhaps the most extraordinary transformation was still waiting ahead. Somewhere within these ancient marine ecosystems, evolution was preparing for a sudden explosion of diversity unlike anything the planet had ever experienced before. New body plans, new survival strategies, and new ecological relationships were already beginning to emerge beneath the oceans. The age of simple life was ending. The ancient Earth that once contained only drifting molecules and silent seas was approaching a future filled with movement, predators, intelligence, and eventually, consciousness itself. And all of it had begun with microscopic chemistry hidden within the warm oceans of the young world, billions of years before. Every living thing on Earth shares the same distant beginning. The forests covering the continents, the fish moving through the oceans, the birds crossing the skies, the insects hidden beneath leaves. Every animal, every plant, every microscopic organism alive today carries a connection to the ancient world where life first emerged billions of years ago. And so do we. Inside every human cell exists chemistry inherited through an unbroken chain of life stretching back across almost the entire history of the planet. The same biological systems that once helped primitive organisms survive within the warm oceans of the early Earth still remain active inside the human body now. The story of the first life on Earth is not separate from us. It is the beginning of us. Long before humans existed, before mammals, dinosaurs, forests, or even fish, The Earth was a silent world of volcanic oceans and drifting chemistry beneath dark skies. The planet contained no thoughts, no memory, no awareness of itself. Then slowly, across immense stretches of time, matter began organizing into increasingly complex forms. Molecules learned to replicate, cells emerged within the ancient seas. Life adapted, evolved, and survived through billions of years of planetary change. And eventually, the universe became capable of observing itself through living minds. The path from the first microscopic organisms to modern humanity seems almost impossible to comprehend. Yet every stage remained connected through continuous evolution across deep time. No sharp boundary separates the modern world from those ancient oceans billions of years ago. The history of life still exists inside us. Human DNA carries instructions shaped through an evolutionary process older than mountains, older than forests, older even than most of the continents themselves. Deep within living cells, ancient biological systems continue operating in ways inherited from organisms that lived long before complex animals appeared on Earth. Even the chemistry of the human body reflects those distant origins. The salts dissolved within human blood resemble the chemistry of ancient seawater. Mitochondria inside human cells descend from microorganisms that formed cooperative relationships billions of years ago during the early evolution of complex life. The genetic code shared across nearly all living organisms points toward common ancestry, reaching back to the first biological systems on the young Earth. We are not separate from the ancient planet. We are one of its oldest continuations. And yet the vast majority of Earth's history unfolded without human beings present at all. If the entire history of the Earth were compressed into a single day, human civilization would appear only within the final seconds before midnight. For almost the entire existence of the planet, life remained microscopic, hidden beneath oceans, or slowly evolving through ancient ecosystems long vanished from the modern world. The age of humanity is incredibly small compared to the age of life itself. Still, through science and imagination, humans have learned to look backward across deep time toward those distant beginnings hidden within the ancient Earth. Rocks, fossils, genetics, and chemistry allow us to reconstruct fragments of a story billions of years old. The story of how a lifeless world slowly became alive. Some mysteries remain unsolved. Scientists still debate exactly where life first appeared and how the transition from chemistry to biology truly occurred. Perhaps future discoveries will reveal new answers hidden deep within ancient rocks or distant oceans elsewhere in the universe. But one truth remains clear. Everything alive today descends from those first fragile beginnings inside the ancient seas of the young Earth. Every living organism is part of the same long biological journey stretching backward across billions of years to the first cells drifting beneath volcanic skies. The oceans where life began are gone now. The ancient atmosphere has changed. The continents have been reshaped again and again through geological time. Yet life endured through every transformation. And somewhere within every living creature on Earth, a small memory of those ancient oceans still remains. Tonight, the Earth feels familiar. Forests move beneath the wind, waves cross the oceans, cities glow softly across the continents while billions of living creatures breathe beneath the modern sky. The world appears full of movement, sound, and life so ancient and permanent that it can seem impossible to imagine the planet any other way. But for most of its history, the Earth was silent. Before the first cell emerged, the world existed as an empty sphere of rock, water, storms, and drifting chemistry moving through the darkness of space. No eyes observed the oceans. No mind reflected upon existence. The planet carried no memory except the slow processes of geology and time. And yet, hidden within those ancient seas, something extraordinary began. Simple chemistry slowly became organized. Molecules formed patterns capable of replication. Fragile cells emerged within the warm oceans of the young Earth. Through countless generations of survival and change, evolution gradually transformed microscopic life into the vast biological world that now surrounds us. The process required almost unimaginable amounts of time. Billions of years passed while life remained tiny beneath the oceans. Entire continents formed and disappeared. Mountains rose and eroded away. Ice spread across the planet and retreated again. Meteor impacts, volcanic eruptions, and shifting climates continuously reshaped the Earth. Still, life endured. Generation after generation, organisms adapted to changing environments, while evolution carried biology steadily forward through deep time. The descendants of ancient microbes eventually filled the oceans, spread across the land, rose into the skies, and developed minds capable of wondering where they came from. In a sense, the universe slowly awakened through life. The atoms inside living organisms were forged long ago inside ancient stars before the Earth itself even existed. Those atoms later became oceans, rocks, atmosphere, and eventually biology. Through the long evolution of life, matter gained the ability to preserve information, adapt, remember, and finally become conscious. Human beings are part of that ancient continuity. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought emerges from biological systems shaped through billions of years of evolution beginning in the first oceans of the Earth. Beneath modern civilization, modern technology, and human history itself, the deeper story of life continues quietly inside every living cell. The ancient world still survives within us. Perhaps this is one of the most extraordinary truths ever discovered. All living creatures on Earth, from forests to whales to human beings, are distant relatives connected through the same ancient ancestry. Every organism alive today belongs to a single, uninterrupted chain of life stretching backward across almost 4 billion years. No generation ever broke the chain. From the first fragile cells drifting beneath volcanic skies to the modern world of conscious minds, life continued, surviving through endless transformation. And somewhere far back within that chain lies the silent Earth where biology first emerged from chemistry inside warm, ancient seas. The oceans where life began no longer exist in their original form. The volcanic skies of the young Earth have faded into the distant past. Yet the story that started there still continues now within every ecosystem, every organism, and every human life alive today. Even the modern oceans carry echoes of that forgotten world. Far beneath the surface, hydrothermal vents still release mineral-rich water into the darkness much as they did billions of years ago. Microbial organisms continue surviving in extreme environments similar to those inhabited by some of Earth's earliest life forms. In remote, shallow waters, stromatolites still grow slowly layer by layer, like living memories from the ancient microbial planet. The past never completely disappears. It remains hidden inside rocks, oceans, cells, and DNA, waiting patiently across time. And perhaps somewhere beyond the Earth, beneath distant oceans, on worlds orbiting other stars, chemistry may still be drifting slowly toward life even now. The universe could contain countless silent planets waiting for their own first cell to emerge beneath dark skies and ancient seas. But here on Earth, that moment already happened long ago. The silent world became alive, and from those tiny beginnings hidden within the oceans of the ancient Earth came everything.